Story 1. Used to work at a Walmart. The Walmart I worked at was open 24 hours back then. Due to my kid's school schedule, I would work overnight shifts so that I would be available to drop him off and pick him up. I would do a 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift every night. During the day I'd sleep, take care of my son, and work my second job some days. I was exhausted a lot during this time in my life. It wasn't a great time. I had to do what I could to cover rent though. This Walmart was one of the bigger ones. It was a supercenter, not just a grocery store, so it had everything. It was one of the few open 24 hours around here. I think COVID changed that though. When I got there around 10 this one cold night, there were still a decent amount of shoppers in the store. A lot of people would come in for some late night shopping. As the hours would pass, it would of course quiet down tremendously. The late hours of the night would attract a lot of weirder characters, weirder than the usual ones during the day. Into the AM hours of the night, there was only one person working the front of the store, and he or she would be at the self-registers. There were no regular registers open this late. There would also be a couple of stock workers on the floor, which was what I did. Then there would be a couple warehouse workers in the back, who I really didn't ever interact with. They did their own thing. And then there's just the night manager on duty. I was in the cereal aisle, doing my usual stock work. I noticed a customer walk past the aisle. Then seconds later, he stepped back into view at the end of the aisle, stopped, and looked down at me. When I looked back at him, he started looking at the cereal. The guy had curly hair. I couldn't gauge his ethnicity. He had a black backpack on that looked like it was stuffed to the brim with God knows what. He awkwardly lingers in the cereal aisle for a minute, apparently looking at the granola bars. Then he came a little closer to me and asked me where the bread is. I pointed him in the right direction. He said thanks and slowly walked away out of the aisle. I watched him walk away, and he had a very noticeable waddle in his walk. When he was out of sight, he was out of mind though. The problem was that he wasn't out of sight for long. I was in the cereal aisle for quite some time, and I started noticing that every few minutes that guy would slowly pass by the aisle looking down in this direction. He wasn't holding anything. He didn't get any bread. He just had on his big, sketchy backpack. I started working faster just so I could finish this aisle and move away from him. When I was done, I brought the empty U-boat platform back to the warehouse, where I grabbed another U-boat full of boxes, ready to stock. I purposely picked an aisle far away from the cereal aisle. I was now in the chips aisle. This is also about 45 minutes after initial contact with that guy, so there should have been no way he was still here. But I was wrong. He found me. I was rotating the newer bags of chips behind the older ones on the shelf, and then I looked to my right, and that guy was at the end of the aisle, creeping again. He still had nothing in his hands. This man had been creeping around the store for almost an hour. He then finally approached me, as I was dreading he would. I tried to look away until he started to speak. I don't remember word for word what he said, but basically, he said that he's been checking me out, and he couldn't resist coming up to me telling me how beautiful I am. I responded as politely as I could. I did a fake little laugh and said, "Number, thank you, that's very sweet." He didn't stop there though. He asked a bunch of personal questions, like where I'm from. I gave fake answers to everything. This guy absolutely reeked, and his breath was awful. I was genuinely repulsed. He asked for my number, and I said I'm seeing someone. He said, "There's nothing wrong with us just being friends." To get him to leave me alone, I gave him a fake number. I then told him I really can't be talking to anyone while I'm working. He made some creepy comment before walking away, thinking he was all swabbed that he got my number, when in reality he was genuinely creepy, and I gave him a fake number. I thought that would be the end of it. Hours went by, and time felt like it was going in reverse. I wanted to go home. Then the only other stock worker on the job at that hour suddenly walkie-talkied me, saying there's some creepy-looking guy asking for me. I said, "Oh no." and then told her to tell him I left. I then basically made a beeline for the employee lounge, where I planned on hiding for a while. I made it to the lounge, and then sat in one of the seats. Then the double doors opened, and in came that guy. He looked at me, and he looked angry. He yelled, "You gave me a fake number, you bitch." I think I swallowed my gum out of fear. I said, "You can't be back here, sir." He then took off his backpack and plopped it on the table next to mine. He started unzipping it as he looked at me. That's when it was time for me to go. I got up and ran past him without thinking. He tried to grab my arm, but he failed. As I ran through the store, I looked back and saw he was running after me. I ran to the front of the store and outside to my car. It was the only thing I could think to do in the moment. Alternatively, I could have tried finding the male warehouse workers in the back, or even the manager, but that was no guarantee. I got to my car and saw the man leave the Walmart looking for me. He was slow. He must have been on something. He saw my car, but it was too late. I was already driving away. I called the night manager and let him know what just went down, and that I'm not comfortable staying there tonight. I also warned him of the man with a backpack full of unknown contents. My manager told me I can't leave the place short-staffed. He said he'd call the police to make sure the man doesn't come back, and he told me to come back. I was adamant about not returning that night though. He eventually got the message and said he'd review the camera footage, but that I need to come back tomorrow night, and I did. He allegedly notified the police the next day of the man and gave the police department the surveillance footage. I admit a lot of characters work in that job, but this guy was by far the scariest. I don't know what he was reaching for in his backpack. I don't want to either. Was 14 when this happened. There's a Walmart that's walking distance to my house. I used to sometimes go there to buy clothing and such before I was of driving age, since it was so close. Sometimes I'd go with my friend Emily. Sometimes I'd just go alone. The Walmart is part of the nearby mall, but the mall kind of stinks now. Most of the good stores have closed over the years. Plus, I wasn't made of money when I was 14, and Walmart is cheap. One night, I walked to Walmart with my AirPods in. It's a 15-minute walk. When I put my AirPods in, I shut out everything else around me. I feel like most people with basic social awareness know that if someone's wearing headphones, it means they don't want to have to take them out to talk to you. I was minding my business in Walmart, in the girls' clothing department, when I noticed a guy next to me saying something. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but it looked like he was talking to me. I took out my AirPods and I said, "Are you talking to me?" He said yes. He was this shorter man with gray hair who looked like 50. He had glasses and a clean-shaven face. He smiled and said, "I didn't see your headphones." Sure, he didn't. He said he was just telling me how his daughter buys the same exact kind of jeans I was wearing. I had no idea why he was telling me this, but I'm a very polite person. To everybody. I always have been. So I chose to be kind to him by laughing and saying, "Oh, that's funny." That should have been the end of an interaction that didn't need to happen. But of course, this wouldn't be a story if it was. I was still looking through this rack of tops as the man kept trying to talk to me. He mistook my kindness for actual interest in talking to him clearly. He asked my age, and I said 14, and his response was unsettling. He basically said, "Oh, what a great age. So mature but still so young." He asked my name, and for some reason I actually gave him my real name, and his response to my name was, "Wow, that's my favorite name for a girl." Next up, he asked what school I went to. Around now was when I decided to start making things up. I said I'm actually not from around here. I'm just visiting my cousin. He couldn't let it go though, and he persisted, asking where I'm from. I said I'm from out of state, keeping it vague. But then he said, "I've seen you around here before. Are you sure you're not from around here?" I looked at him and tried to think of a response, but instead, I ended up turning around and walking away from him. I was, for the first time ever, actually made very uncomfortable by a stranger. Way he said he'd seen me before made me feel as though he'd been watching me or paid attention to me in this Walmart before. I went to buy the jeans I was holding at the front of the Walmart. Then I walked through the store to enter the mall. It was November or December, and they had just put up the Christmas decorations, so I wanted to walk through. And I also wanted to see if any new stores opened since my shopping in Walmart was cut short. I walked through the mall with really nothing catching my eye. I went into a Victoria's Secret, and while inside of there, I saw through the glass that guy from Walmart sitting on a bench in the mall outside of the Victoria's Secret. I left the store and started walking very quickly through the mall. When I turned around and saw he was now walking behind me, I started to panic and called my mom asking her for a ride because I was being followed by a man. I took her advice and waited in a store with multiple people inside. He came to the entrance of the store and he creepily said my name in this way that he clearly didn't want a lot of people to hear him. I started to feel sick. I went to the cashier and said, "This man is following me. I don't know him." Some customers overheard and looked over, and the man clearly noticed and started walking away into the mall. The cashier, who was probably only 20 years old herself, sympathized with me. A couple even came over and said they'd wait with me until my mom got here. My mom came into the mall eventually, and I left with her, thanking the couple who waited with me. I didn't go to the mall or that Walmart alone anymore. I didn't even go back with friends for a long time either. I hope that guy got caught being a creep and has been taken off the streets. Worst job ever was working at Walmart. I worked there only for a few months. I hated every minute of it, honestly. I didn't get along with a lot of my coworkers. The customers were crazy and weird, and I felt like a lot of people just generally were unfriendly. I was 24, and Walmart was my second job to make ends meet with my new apartment. Sometimes I'd work register, sometimes I'd work the desk outside the fitting room, and sometimes I'd work general sales associate. On this day, I was a general associate, walking around the place assisting customers and straightening things on the shelves. I interacted with a bunch of people that day. I still remember dealing with some of the dumbest customers I'd ever had the displeasure of interacting with, but nothing could have prepared me for who I was going to run into that day. I got a random pat on the back, and I turned around to see my ex-girlfriend Casey. She looked super happy to see me and went in for a hug. I was surprised because she didn't live anywhere near here. I asked what brought her here, and she said she heard through a mutual friend that I started working here recently. Casey and I did not leave off on good terms at all. She had been harassing me for a while, since I had broken up with her, and I had to end up blocking her on everything to get her to stop. She was insanely controlling throughout our relationship and downright obsessive, bipolar, and paranoid. And after I ended things with her, she wouldn't stop trying to contact me and meet up with me to talk things out, even though we had talked things out multiple times. She even left multiple voicemails crying. I take no joy in any of that. I don't say any of this to belittle her or make a joke of mental illness, but she has issues, and I came to learn that. And I had to tell her multiple times her behavior is not normal. Her finding out I got this job and coming to my place of work I was not okay with. Even though I hugged her back and was cordial at first in this interaction, I eventually cut the crap and said, "Why are you here?" The fake friendliness stopped here on both sides. Her face got more serious, and she started telling me that it's really messed up that I block her out of my life like this. I told her this is the exact kind of behavior that made me block her. Showing up to my job is not normal. Then, I started asking her which mutual friend told her that I worked here. She claimed that's irrelevant. I assured her, it most certainly is not irrelevant, because I didn't believe that anyone told her where I work. I had broken up with Casey many months ago. She should have had no way of knowing about my new job or apartment, and I was confident. None of my friends were even in contact with her anymore. I told her I'm seeing someone else now. I have to get back to work. Please leave and don't contact me again. She refused to leave, so I simply just started walking away to an employees-only area. She didn't follow me back there. It was at this moment I actually started considering trying to get a restraining order. After my shift was over, it had to be like 11 p.m., closing time. Left the store and went straight home. My roommate was home as Carl was in the driveway. I parked next to him and went inside. I went straight to the kitchen to make myself a late dinner, as I always would after closing shifts. I microwaved some frozen meal and went to the living room to play video games. For a while, this was my only time to unwind and do what I wanted. I played for maybe an hour, then went to bed. I woke up not long after falling asleep. I thought I heard something. I looked up and realized my bedroom door was open. I definitely did not do that. My roommate Paul goes to bed really early because he works early, and there's no chance he'd just get up and randomly open my door. I got up and walked out into the living room. I turned on a lamp and looked around the place. I went over to the front door and it was unlocked. What the hell was going on? I was thinking, did Paul leave? I looked out the window and saw that his car was still there. I locked the front door. Then I went to his bedroom door and tried opening it. It was locked. I knocked on the door lightly once, and he didn't respond, so he was asleep. I was genuinely confused. I went out front and looked under the pot where we kept a spare key. It wasn't there. My heart was in my throat at this point. The only person in this world besides Paul and my family who knows that I like to hide a spare key outside is Casey. I checked at least 5 times under the pot, even checking the surrounding area on the chance that maybe it was kicked out of place or something. I went back inside the house and shut the front door. I went to the knife holder in the kitchen, and the biggest knife was missing. My phone was still in my bedroom. I had to be smart about this. I tiptoed to my bedroom door until I was close enough to grab the doorknob as fast as I could and slam it shut from the outside. I screamed as loud as I could for Paul. He erupted from his room, obviously confused, and there were suddenly bangs on the bedroom door from the other side, along with Casey's voice saying, "I'm sorry, let's talk." I held the door closed with all my might as she kept trying to pull it open. Paul called the police as I held the door. After a few minutes of this, Casey stopped trying to pull the door open, and she was hysterically crying on the other side of the door. Finally, the police arrived and came inside. I moved away from the door, and the officers made sure Casey dropped the knife before she came out. She was, of course, arrested, and I didn't even have to press charges. She was charged by the state for, I believe, burglary in the 2nd degree, and she's currently serving a pretty lengthy prison term for this. I'm honestly shocked she didn't get charged for attempted murder. It's a sick situation all around. I don't know when she'll be out. I'll have been long moved out of this place by then. My biggest regret is not catching the red flags with her early on. I've been working as an overnight security guard at Walmart for about 3 years now, at this big old supercenter just off the highway near my hometown. It's definitely one of the better jobs I've worked, even with all the nights involved. The pay is decent, the benefits are okay, and most nights, it's just me and another guard, chilling in the asset protection office, keeping an eye on the cameras and talking trash to keep each other awake. The store is closed from midnight to 6, so it tends to be nice and quiet on the inside. But outside, that parking lot's a whole different story. After a while, you get used to seeing things that make most folks crawl. But this one night, about 6 months back, I saw what has to be the scariest thing I've ever seen on the job. I'm pretty seasoned by now, and by that I mean I'm not some rookie jumping at shadows, but I'm also not some kind of wannabe cop either. My job's to watch the store, make sure nobody's breaking in or setting the place on fire, and anything outside the store walls is for the cops to handle, unless it's a direct threat to the property. We've got cameras all over the place, inside and outside, and they're good enough to catch a shoplifter snagging a TV or some kid spray painting, the loading dock. But out in the far reaches of the parking lot, forget it. It's all grainy blobs and shadows past a certain point. Now anyway, this night started out as normal, quiet, pretty boring really. And then, at around 2 a.m., I told my shift partner that I was headed out for a smoke break. I've been trying to quit for years, but those overnight shifts drive people to worse habits than smoking, and purely out of boredom too. My partner was back at the security desk scrolling through his phone or watching reruns of Cops on YouTube, and I told him that I was stepping out for a smoke and then grabbed my jacket and headed for the emergency exit by the auto care center. I propped the door open with a brick, which is against policy, I know, but nobody's checking at that hour. And then I just stood outside, taking some drags and staring out into the night. The parking lot is massive, obviously, just like most Walmart parking lots are, I guess. And at 2 a.m., it's mostly empty, except for a few employee cars and an RV or two. Sometimes we get drifters or tweakers, maybe kids racing their souped-up Civics, but most of the time I don't pay them much mind. I'm a real live and let live kind of guy, you know? I'm not out here to try and be a hero or boss anyone around. I just want my smoke, and then I want to go back and do my job. Now anyway, I'm halfway through my smoke break, leaning against the wall, when I notice these two cars out in the far corner of the lot, less than 100 yards out. They're backed up to each other, trunk to trunk, very close like you know. One's dark SUV, the other's a beat-up sedan, maybe a Camry, or something. The SUV's got its trunk open, and there's 3 guys standing around it. They're not being loud or anything, but the way they're positioned, huddled, glancing around every few seconds, it's obvious they're up to no good. I've seen deals go down before. Not a lot, but I've seen them. Usually it's quick. Money changes hands, trunks close, and then they peel out. I don't call the cops, unless it's blatant, like if they're waving a pistol around or something. My rule is, if it's not on Walmart property, and it's not a clear threat, I let it slide. The cops got better things to do, and so do I. So I'm watching these guys, keeping my distance, just kind of being snoopy I guess. And 2 of them are standing by the open trunk, gesturing like they're showing something off, while the 3rd guy is standing a little closer to the sedan, kind of hanging back like he's making his mind up. They're all dressed up in hoodies and jeans, nothing too flashy, but I can't make out faces or license plates from where I'm at, and our cameras sure as hell wouldn't be able to either. I figured it's drugs, maybe grass, maybe something harder. It could just as easily be guns, but I don't see any obvious hardware. Not that I could from that distance that I was at, though. I'm not spooked, just curious, you know. Like watching a nature documentary about shady parking lot creatures. But that's when things take a turn. The guy who was hanging back steps forward and then leans in to look at whatever's in the SUV's trunk. He's got his hands on his hips, very casual-like he's inspecting something up close. And I'm thinking, alright, the deal's wrapping up. They're gonna be gone soon. But then, out of nowhere, one of the other guys pulls something from behind his back. A bag or something, maybe a pillowcase. I couldn't tell. And then he throws it over the 3rd guy's head. Before I can even process what's happening, the other SUV guy lunges forward and starts stabbing him, and I mean like turning him into a sieve, stabbing him over and over, super quick. Bang, 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 bang. The guy with his bag over his head doesn't even have time to scream. He just stumbles, struggles a little, and then he's down, out of sight as his buddies throw him in the trunk, and I'm just frozen for a split second, cigarette dangling between my fingers thinking, oh God, help me. That was for real, wasn't it? And my heart's pounding like a jackhammer, and every instinct I've got is telling me to get the hell inside. So I dropped my smoke without stopping to stop on it, and then bolted for the emergency exit. I left it propped open like always, and I'm not a small guy, but I was running like I'd just seen a ghost, and as I'm pulling the door shut behind me, I hear tires screeching, and then I catch a glimpse of the SUV speeding off, red taillights glowing as it disappeared into the dark. I locked the door, my hands shaking so bad that I could barely get the bolt to slide, and I remember cursing under my breath, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. Did I just witness a murder? A kidnapping? Hell was that? And I sprint back to my security office where my partner was still parked at the desk, scrolling through his phone like it was just another Tuesday. And I yelled at him to call the cops, and he looked up at me like confused, wondering what's going on. I told him what I saw, how I was pretty certain I just witnessed a guy getting murdered, and his eyes went wide. And then he dialed 911 right away, and I remember pacing back and forth as he handed me his phone, trying to get my thoughts straight. As I replayed everything in my head, and it all happened so fast, maybe 10 seconds from the bag going over the guy's head to the SUV peeling out. I can still picture the way the guy's arm moved. That quick, jerky, stabby motion, like something right out of a horror movie. The cops showed up about 15 minutes later. I told them everything I saw, which honestly wasn't all that much. And there were 3 guys, 2 cars. One got stabbed a bunch, and then the SUV took off. I didn't see any faces, didn't catch any plate numbers, and I didn't hear any names either. They start asking me a million questions. What kind of bag was it? How many times did the guy get stabbed? Did I hear anything? Did I see any blood? But I had nothing for him. It was too far, too dark, and it all happened too quick. I felt kind of useless, like I should have seen more or done more. But then what was I supposed to do? Run out there with my flashlight and my walkie-talkie? We're not armed on shift, and they don't train us for anything like that either. I'm just a guy, making sure nobody steals anything or spray paints the walls. And after we talked, the cops seemed more interested in the security footage, so me and my partner pulled up the feeds from the exterior cameras. We've got a couple pointed at the parking lot, but like I said, they're not great. The cars were too far out, right at the edge of the lot where the lights barely reached them. All the footage showed were 2 blurry shapes and some movement, but you couldn't make out details. No faces or plates, really nothing useful at all. The cops were frustrated, but obviously not with us. They took a copy of the footage anyway, and said they'd check the sedan that was still out there after they left. My partner and I just sat there, quiet for a while. He was alright, but I was pretty shaken up. I kept thinking about how fast it happened. 1 second the guy was alive, probably thinking that he was making a quick deal. Then the next, he's got a bag over his head and a knife in his gut, and it was all over and done in seconds. It was just crazy to me. How does that even happen? Who were those guys? Was it a setup? A betrayal? Some kind of gang thing? Sometimes it frustrates me that I'll never know, and the cops never really followed up, at least not with me. And I checked the news for days, but there's really nothing. No reports or arrests. And I still work the overnight shift, but I don't smoke outside anymore. I use those Zin things now, those little pouches, and I stay in the break room if I need a fix. But every time I walk by that emergency exit, I'm reminded of what happened that night and how I watched it all go down. I've seen a lot in this. Job, fights, thefts, you name it. And they're forgotten a week after. But what happened that night is something I know I'll never forget. I have an unusual face. I see people looking when I talk to them, and I catch them staring when I walk past. And they can't help themselves, and it doesn't make me mad, or anything. I'd look to if the roles were reversed. Now, I'm not ugly by any standard. I do okay in the dating world, but the story of how I got the face is quite ugly. And since it's one that I feel like I'm getting off my chest, as I sent this in to you, you get to read about it. So I grew up in Ohio, and although my mom tried her best, I was a bad kid growing up. She had to work a lot to keep her son, i.e. me, clothed and fed. and Grandma was just too damn tired to keep a leash on me, so by the time I was 13, I was running wild almost every night in the company of some equally damaged friends of mine. I say damaged because it was around that same time I found out my dad hadn't just run off. He'd been murdered. And after I found out, I was just ... mad. All the time, I guess. But so were my friends, and that's how we ended up discovering a mutual love for our favorite pastime, breaking stuff. On a Friday night, we'd head over. Two places where almost every single house on the street was derelict and boarded up. Then where we could, we'd kick in doors, kick down fences, and smash wooden beams. And we didn't always stick to abandoned houses either. And a lot of the time, we'd picked one or two occupied ones and toss a brick or two through their front windows. We were letting out all the tension, I guess, and I'm not making excuses for myself. That's just how it was back then. We weren't interested in school, and we dropped out as early as we could. Then for the next couple of years, we bummed around, breaking stuff, stealing stuff, and making money where we could. Then one day, a friend of ours got busted for something he didn't even do. And then he ended up going to juvie for it, and I guess that scared me straight. I got my drinking and smoking under control, cut my hair and took out my nose ring, then went around town trying to find somewhere that would give a job to someone with zero work experience doing anything. And well, that place turned out to be Walmart. An employee told me to write to the store's hiring manager, explaining my situation, and I didn't think that it'd work, but it did, and I got an interview. Explained that I wanted to make an honest living and keep myself out of trouble. The hiring manager told me, as long as my background check cleared, he'd give me a shot, and I'd be on probation to start with, meaning they could let me go at any time, no questions asked. But I was willing to prove myself, so he threw me a bone. A week later, I was at orientation doing a bunch of paperwork and watching a bunch of videos. It was tiring, doing all that lifting and walking and dealing with assholes for just minimum wage. My coworkers were kind of standoffish with me to begin with too, so I felt this pressure not to mess up and, I don't know, prove them wrong about me. After a few months, people started to warm up to me, and my supervisor started noticing my hard work and enthusiasm. I got more hours, which meant more money. Then by the time they were talking about cross-training me as a cashier, I realized they actually trusted me, and that meant a lot. Made me feel like I could be a normal person instead of some scumbag to them. The routine and stability were nice too. It gave me a reason to stay sober, clocking in, working all day, then going home knowing that paycheck was going to be there no matter what. And it was kind of bliss, and I was actually happy. But I guessed that I was living on borrowed time, as one day I was stocking shelves, just doing my thing, when I noticed a guy watching me from down the aisle. You get used to that pretty quick. People were just curious, especially kids, but they usually move on after a second or two once their curiosity is satisfied, and this guy didn't. Instead, and I'm watching out of the corner of my eye, he just stands there, definitely not looking at anything on the shelves, like his face is 100% locked onto me. I made eye contact with the guy as I turned to grab another box. Then, purely out of habit, I say, "Can I help you with anything today, sir?" I figured that might be his deal, like he needed help but was just too shy to ask. But he just smiled and said, no thank you," and then turned around and walked off. The guy seemed like a little socially awkward, but I'd seen weirder stuff in my time and hadn't even reached half a year of employment yet either, so I'd had no doubt that there was more to come. But then, 4 days later, on the Saturday shift that I agreed to cover for our coworker, the exact same thing happened again. I was stocking shelves in another area of the store, and I saw a figure in the corner of my eye. I didn't recognize him right away. It took a second for the penny to drop, but when it did, I tried to stay as polite and professional as possible, and just said, "Hello again, sir. You need help with anything?" It was almost a carbon copy of the first time. He smiled, shook his head, and then walked off without saying anything. Now I'm thinking, okay, this guy's definitely a little off. But Walmart without weirdos is like a day without sunshine, I always say. It just didn't feel like I'd worked a full shift unless I encountered at least one. I mentioned the whole thing to a coworker of mine, but she just sort of laughed, like, looks like someone's gonna crush on you. And we turned the whole thing into a joke like that, much in the same way we did with everything that bothered us about the job. Laughing about stuff burned off a little of the tension, so that the next time something happened, he didn't just explode in the face of a rude customer. I also wasn't too worried because I'd never had a weird customer like that before, and honestly, I didn't think that he'd be back after that second time. But I guess that was more hopeful than anything, because maybe a week or so later, there he was again. I was stocking shelves. I saw him step into the aisle, and after a quick look to see who it was, I remember saying, "You gotta be kidding me," under my breath before turning to face him. I said, "Hello again, sir," with just enough hardness to my voice to let him know that I didn't appreciate the repeat performance. I wasn't scared or anything. I was more wondering where the hell this was all going and what the guy's angle was. He smiled when I said hello to him, and he said it back very calmly, before reaching into his pocket and pulling out his phone. He held it up, looking at something on his screen, then his eyes darted at me for a second, and then back to his phone. I figured that he was looking at a product on his phone, and he was about to ask if we had it in stock or something. I couldn't figure out why it took him 3 tries to get there, but like I said, it wouldn't be the weirdest thing that had ever happened on shift. But he doesn't show me anything. He just carries on looking back and forth, as I noticed something about the hand he was holding his phone with. The back was all scarred up, like an old burn scar, like all pale pink compared to his wrist and fingers. Now I was halfway through saying, "Sir, if there's nothing else I can help you with," when he cut me off and asked, "You don't remember me, do you?" It sounds crazy, looking back on it, but I had to sort of tighten my lips to keep from just grinning in his face, because of course I remembered him. Half my coworkers were probably saying to each other, "Hey, check it out, Craig's crush is back, and he's asking for his number now." And as the thought entered my head, it almost had me laughing out loud. I told him, "Sure, I remember you, sir. This is the 3rd time we've talked by now." Then in response, the guy just kind of laughed, a little as he slid his phone back into his pocket. And then he says, "You really don't remember me, do you?" I guess that was his way of telling me that he knew who I was, but I was wearing my name badge at the time. I legitimately thought that he was just reading it off of that. I asked if I was supposed to remember him, because I didn't, and then asked where he knew me from if it wasn't from Walmart. I was racking my brain the entire time thinking, is this guy an old neighbor or something? Someone from school maybe, or a cop that I wrestled with one time, but nothing was sticking. The guy's face just didn't ring a single bell. The guy said he wasn't all that surprised that I didn't remember him, and he says, "It's been a long time. You were just a kid when we last met." And I fell back on my training and tried turning a not-so-nice conversation into a nice one, saying something like, "Well, no wonder I don't remember you. I barely remember what I ate for dinner 2 nights ago." But the guy didn't laugh. He kept on smiling, but he didn't laugh. Then he asked me, and I had to look this up to make sure that I'm spelling it right, but he asked me, "Do you know what degenerative myopathy is, Craig?" You know when you've never heard of something before, like something science-y, and you hear the words, and you're just sort of like, huh. I mean, you probably just did it reading what I copied and pasted into this email here, thought DJ. What now? Well, I hope you didn't go looking it up or anything, because I'm about to explain what it is, which is exactly what the weird guy with the burn scar did with me. And I told him, "No, I don't." And then, in so many words, this is what he told me. Degenerative myopathy is a degenerative disease that affects German shepherds, where their back legs start to weaken and eventually give out. It comes from a tiny defect in their DNA, and when the defect is present, the nerves in a dog's lower spine start to break down over time. The condition usually shows up when the German Shepherd is older, around 8 years or more, and at first, you might notice the dog dragging its back paws a little or wobbling when it walks. It's like their back legs are forgetting how to work properly, and then over months or even a couple of years, the weakness gets worse. The dog might struggle to stand up, have trouble walking, or eventually lose the ability to move its back legs altogether. It's tough to watch because the dog is still alert and happy in their mind, but their body just won't cooperate. Now he's giving me this weird speech, and then when he got to the sad part there about them still being all happy on their minds, I had to interrupt him. And I remember saying very politely, "Sir, I don't understand why you're telling me this." And he just raised a hand, and then kept going. There's no cure for degenerative myopathy yet. Vets can suggest things like physical therapy, special harnesses, even wheelchairs to help a dog stay mobile and comfortable for as long as possible. The goal is to keep them happy and enjoying life, even as their legs give out. And for now, researchers are working hard to learn more, but the best we can do is give these dogs lots of love and support to keep their tails wagging. And I remember in that moment thinking, is this guy working for some kind of charity or representing a drug or something? And so I asked him, but he said no. He told me he had a dog like that once, a German Shepherd, that was the most loyal and beautiful dog he'd ever owned. He got her from a rescue after some cops raided a puppy mill, the kind of place where they don't take any care in the breeding of the dogs. They just churn out puppies for profit. He was told by people at the rescue that she'd probably have the DMD effect. Some of the older dogs at the mill were showing advanced symptoms, so they figured it had been passed on to a lot of the pups. And they were right. And when his loyal old dog reached 8 years old, he said, her back legs started to give out. Most of the time, vet recommends putting the dog down once its quality of life gets too rough. German Shepherds are energetic dogs, and they need to run and play and exercise just like any other. When they can't get all that, they get depressed. And when they get depressed, it makes the symptoms of the diseases all the worse. He started telling me how they lie there in the night, crying out because they can't make it to the bathroom. And then I interrupted him again, having dropped all the professional courtesy. I just say, dude, if you don't need my help, I'm probably gonna get security. I got a lot to get done today. And the guy opened his jacket, very discreetly showing off the gun that he had holstered near his armpit, and then softly said, "If you move a muscle, I'll kill you, and I'll kill everyone in this whole store before I eat this gun. I don't care." I just froze. The guy went from a weird but gentle old guy to threatening me with this psychopathic look in his eyes, and then told me to shut up and listen, and then just went about talking about his dog. He said he didn't have the heart to have her put down, how the dog had saved his life during a messy divorce where he lost all custody of his kids. He said he'd resigned himself to taking care of a disabled dog until it died, or he did, and then came the fire. He was driving home from the grocery store, having only left his dog alone for maybe 15 to 20 minutes. Then when he turned on his street, he saw the black smoke rising into the air. He said he just knew from the position of it, after having lived there for all those years, that it was his house that was going up in smoke. So he put his foot down in the gas, skidded into his driveway, then ran into his burning home to try and save his dog. He burned his hand, checking a metal doorknob to see if it was warm. It wasn't just warm, it fried his skin and took a whole layer off. He used his shirt to open the door, and his dog was laying on the other side. That dog was a smart old pooch, and when she was able, she used to be able to open up doors by standing on her hind legs and scrabbling at the handle. She could do it with round ones too, and it got to be a real problem sometimes. He'd have to put a chair up against the door to stop her wandering out into the backyard at night to bark at squirrels. And he kinda laughed as he talked, like he was recalling these nice memories. but I knew by then that he wasn't some kindly old man. At least, not anymore. He said he tried to save his dog's life, but it was too late. She'd inhaled too much smoke, and she'd passed on. The fire department arrived not long after, put out the blaze. Then after investigating its causes, they told the guy it was arson. The cops had their suspicions as to who did it, but they could never prove it, so no one ever got punished for it. The house was burned so badly that it would have cost him way too much to repair. So he sold the land to developers, moved elsewhere, and tried to let go, but he couldn't. He planned on getting a new dog, but the thought of going through all that heartbreak again was something he couldn't face. Then, without a dog, and only his failing business to keep him going, he found that he didn't have much to live for anymore. The only thing that kept him going was the thought of finding out who'd set his house on fire. And then, after a long search, where for years he didn't get anywhere, he made a breakthrough. He found out that there were some kids in the area around that time, some pretty bad ones too. They liked drinking, smoking, and listening to heavy metal music. But whenever they got their spirits up, they liked one thing more than anything: to go out breaking, stealing, and most relevant here, burning stuff. The sinking feeling that I felt when he said that last part is something that'll be with me till the day I die. I never felt anything like it before, not even when we found out our buddy was headed to juvie for something he didn't even do, and I've never felt anything like it since. It was like the single biggest, oh please God no, moment of my whole, God-forsaken life, and it wasn't over, not by a long shot. I know it must have registered on my face, that feeling of dread, I mean, because I remember seeing a female coworker of mine over the old man's shoulder, and she looked pretty anxious. I guess the old man saw me looking because he looked over his shoulder. Then when he saw my female coworker walking towards us, he whispered, "I'll kill her. You just watch. Say anything and I'll kill her." The same female coworker was one of the people I'd be joking with about how the guy had a crush on me. I guess she came by to silently laugh at first. Then when she saw my face, she realized something was terribly wrong. She walked right up to me and the old guy and asked if everything was all right. I told her everything was fine, and that I was just helping the older gentleman make a purchase. He gave her this warm, convincing smile, told her I was being more than helpful, then declined her offer of more help. She gave me this kind of confused look, then was sort of like, "Well, okay then," and then walked off. But I could tell that she was going straight to security. We took care of each other that way, which was part of the reason I liked working there to begin with. I guess the older guy knew that he had to act, that people were catching on to him because he told me, "We're gonna walk out of the store together, and you're gonna walk with me to my truck. Try to run. I'll blow your kneecap out, then make you watch while I kill everyone I see." I actually didn't remember setting this guy's house on fire. I know that there's people that won't believe that, but it's true. It's true. I do think one of buddies set the fire during a time when I wasn't hanging out with them. I admit that's exactly the kind of thing we used to do back then, but I don't have this sort of photographic memory of setting a fire before running off. I told the guy that, how I thought that he had the wrong guy. But then the way he looked at me let me know that he was incredibly serious about everything he was saying, and could see it, clear as day, how bad he wanted to just pull that gun out and turn my head into a canoe. But he held back, and so did I, raising my hands with palms flat, as if to say, "Don't." He swallowed, like he was swallowing down his rage, and then told me, "Walk ahead of me. Don't stop until I tell you to." I started walking, and just as I did, I saw security appear at the end of the aisle. I told them everything was fine as I walked past. Then they turned their attention to the old man, who told them, "It's all right, gentlemen, I was just leaving." And both guys backed off, gave each other a look. Then the older man nodded to me, and I kept on walking. I could feel the cold sweat on my back and in my armpits as I walked towards the store's front exit. It was like everything in me was screaming at me to not walk out those doors, because when I did, the guy was going to shoot me and then just walk to his truck and drive off. Or worse, He was going to force me to his truck, drive me someplace, and then do even worse things to me before the end. But when he said he'd sooner shoot up the store than allow me to run, and since I believed him when he said that, I knew that I had no choice but to just keep walking out the store and hope it was just me that he hurt and not everyone in sight. On the way out, another coworker asked where I was going. I told him I was taking 5, and since we didn't do stuff like that without permission from supervisors, he knew something was strange. But I don't think that he'd have been able to guess what it was if you gave him a million tries. And by the time we were walking through the parking lot, among the rows of hundreds of parked cars, the guy was jamming the barrel of his gun into my back, saying, "Don't stop now, or I'll put a dozen in the ground before I blow your head off." And I mean it when I say that's what kept me going. That, and the feeling that my luck had finally run out, and it was time to pay the piper for the crap that I'd done when I was a teenager. He told me to get in his passenger seat, and so I did. And then he walked around to the driver's side and then climbed in next to me. I asked him where he was taking me, but he just told me nowhere. He then took a pack of smokes off the dash, put one between his lips, and then pushed the top of the old-style cigarette lighter in his center console. While he waited for it to heat up, he started telling me how he thought about killing me for the longest time. Once he figured out who had set his house on fire and who had killed his dog, he thought about all the different ways that he could get revenge, be it torture us, suffocate us, or set us on fire. But all that was too elaborate, too risky, and too time-consuming. Instead, he thought of something simple but effective, something that could do everything he wanted to do, that it'd take no more time than a few minutes. He had the gun on me the whole time, and I didn't trust that he wasn't going to shoot me. I figured he was just saying all of that to keep my guard down so I wouldn't run, and he'd get to watch my face as he pulled the trigger. But he was telling the truth. He didn't shoot me. He did something else instead. When the cigarette lighter was done heating up, it popped back out with this little click. The guy then grabbed it, lit a cigarette with it, and then told me, "Don't move. You scream, but you don't dare move." And that's when he started leaning toward me, gun in one hand, glowing hot lighter in the other, and I realized what he was going to do. I gripped the door handle, not the opener, but the other plastic handle side. And all I remember, before the pain hit, is begging him, "Not my eye. Please, not my eye." He told me to shut up, thrust the lighter forward. Then, all I remember is searing pain burning through my face and screaming at the top of my lungs as I heard my own skin sizzling. He didn't just keep it in one place either. He dragged the metal across the cheek until I was clawing at the opener and falling out onto the blacktop below. I was whimpering, wanting to cover my face, but not wanting to touch it either. And then, as I looked up, the guy was already starting his car. I thought he was about to back up and drive over me, so I scrambled out of the way, but he just reversed, turned a little, and then took off so fast his open passenger door slammed shut as he moved. People were running over to me after hearing all the commotion, and I'll never forget how someone took one look at my face before a look of shock came over theirs. And then the way they shouted, "Someone call 911, I knew that it was bad. The ambulance was there pretty quick. I thought about trying to drive myself to the hospital, but one of my co-workers told me to just get into the ambulance because it wasn't worth getting into an accident on the drive there. And when I arrived at the ER, nurses led me to a curtained off area and asked me how it happened and how long ago. I answered as best I could, but I was still in so much shock and pain that it all came out kind of garbled. Next came the doctor, who after examining my face told me it was a 3rd-degree burn and a bad one. She said the nerves were destroyed, which was why there was this weird numbness around the blackened crater that used to be a piece of my cheek, but the skin surrounding the burn was screaming with pain. The doctor also warned me that a combo of the burn's depth and where it was on my face meant that there was a big risk of infection and scarring. But at the time, I didn't care. All I wanted was for them to take the pain away, and the rest I could think about later. They put something on my face that made it hurt. But the next thing the nurses applied was sort of a cooling gel, and that's when I started to feel some relief. They also put some kind of antibiotic cream on my cheek, and then put a dressing on it too. And before I was released, the doctor told me to avoid sunlight, not to touch the wound, and just keep everything sterile. And then to come see a reconstructive specialist in a few days. They scheduled a follow-up, handed me a bag of medical stuff, and then sent me home with my face wrapped in bandages. And that first week was a nightmare. Work said to take as much time off as I needed, and they assured me that they'd be working with the cops as they tried to track this guy down. But the wound was bad, really bad, and when I first peeled back the dressing on my face, I saw this oozing circle. I avoided mirrors, but there was no escaping it because sometimes, even through the dressing, I could smell that infection was actually setting in. Antibiotics did keep it at bay, but that was a rough couple of days when I thought that it might actually take, and I followed the care routine obsessively, washing my hands over and over before I changed the dressings and applied the ointments. Sleep was almost impossible. I had live propped up on pillows to avoid the pressure on the wound, but the pain kept me awake. The painkillers dulled the worst of it, but I hated how they left me feeling like a zombie in the daytime. A few days later, I went to the reconstructive specialist's office and was told the dead tissue had to be surgically removed under local anesthesia. And that sucked hard, not just because of how gruesome it was, but because I got to hear all about how the burn was so deep that I needed a skin graft. In the meantime, I was given a kind of gel to help reduce the scarring, but I was told that it would still be very noticeable, even in the best possible scenarios. After the graft, where skin from my thigh was stitched onto my cheek, the site remained swollen and discolored, leaving a raised, lumpy scar that tugged painfully when I spoke or smiled. After 6 months, the scar was a thick circle, pale and shiny, with jagged edges where the red-hot metal had burned deepest. It distorted my cheek, pulling the skin taut and slightly misaligning. My lower eyelid makeup couldn't conceal it. The texture was too uneven, the color too stark, and in some lights it looked kind of like a brand. And I guess that was exactly the intention. Something I could never stop seeing. That it'd remind me of who I was and what I'd done. But more than anything, it reminded me of how scared I felt walking out to that guy's car, as well as the pain I felt before I finally found it in myself to grab the door handle and tumble out onto the road. Speaking of the guy's car, the cops eventually found it burned out on a dirt road a few days later. They said that there was evidence that he transferred into another vehicle, but since there were no cameras of any of the back roads, there was very little chance that they'd find out what his second ride had been. All they had was the security camera footage from the store, but there was no matching the guy's face up to any known suspect. He just walked me outside, scarred me for life, driven off to a second vehicle, and then dropped off the face of the earth. But do you want to know something? Not once have I thought about going looking for this guy, because I believe we did do what he accused us of. I do think that we killed his dog, and if that is true, well, what I got was generous and merciful, given the circumstances. Sometimes I stare at it and think about how much worse it could have been. The specialist says laser treatments or further surgeries might make it look a little less obvious, but I know deep down that the damage is too deep. For now, I live with it, a reminder of that day and what I used to be. I apply my sunscreen, but less for the actual protection and more as a way of trying to reclaim some control over what's now the most eye-catching and obvious aspect of my physical appearance. And like I said, I'm not ugly or anything, not by any standard, but I sure do have an unusual face. Just after midnight, on August 3rd of 2019, a 21-year-old Texan man departed the home of his grandparents in the Dallas suburb of Allen and climbed into his car. Over the next 2 hours, he drove approximately 660 miles west, stopping twice, at service stations hundreds of miles apart. During his stops, he bought gas and energy drinks, caffeinating to remain focused during the long drive ahead. By the time the sun had risen high in the skies behind him, the man had reached El Paso, the Texan border town that straddles the international divide with its conjoined Mexican twin, Ciudad Juarez. Yet instead of heading to a specific destination, he began driving around the east side of El Paso, cruising the streets for almost an hour, with seemingly no purpose whatsoever. Just before 9 a.m., the man spotted a branch of Walmart opposite Cielo Vista Mall, and after parking his car in the store's lot, he walked inside and began wandering the aisles. After maybe 20 to 30 minutes of slowly ambling around the store, the man noticed a loss prevention associate watching him from a distance, as if embarrassed at the assumption that he was a shoplifter. The rather awkward 21-year-old headed for the fresh produce section, picked up an orange, and then purchased it at the checkouts before heading for an exit. He then stood outside the store, eating his orange, before wiping his hand on his shirt and walking back to his car. For the next 20 to 30 minutes, the man sat in his driver's seat, thinking about his family, his future, and his freedom. And he suddenly grabbed a laptop from his back seat and booted up the device. Then, at exactly 10:15 a.m., he posted a thread to the website 8chan simply titled, "It's time." 5 minutes later, the man uploaded a PDF document to the same thread, entitled "The Inconvenient Truth." 8chan's moderators quickly removed the document, but fast-fingered users were able to copy and share its contents with alarming efficiency. Moderators began to panic, and not just because control of their own website was slipping through their fingers. They were panicking because the document's contents contained a bio-filled diatribe of far-right conspiracies, as well as a call to violence that was as urgent as it was chilling. Site moderators rushed to inform the authorities, but it was too late, and try as they might, what was coming could not be stopped. Back in the Walmart parking lot, now baking in the mid-morning sun, the 21-year-old climbed out of his car, then took something from his trunk. He strapped it to his body, tightening strips of nylon by yanking them through plastic slings. Then, once he was done, he began walking toward the Walmart. Standing outside were a group of fundraisers from the all-female El Paso Fusion soccer team who cheerfully solicited donations from passersby. Nearby, a woman slowly pushed a shopping cart toward the store. The 21-year-old spotted her, raised a semi-automatic Romanian-made version of an AKM rifle, then fired the first shot of what would become a massacre. This is where the man becomes the shooter. After executing the woman pushing her shopping cart with a single, calmly placed shot, the shooter turned the rifle on the fundraisers and opened fire. The move took them no longer than a fraction of a second, giving the fundraisers no time to react. Then, as they turned to flee, bullet after bullet tore through their bodies as the shooter methodically aimed and fired over and over until all lay still. The store's manager, who witnessed the shooter engaging the fleeing fundraisers, immediately issued a code brown to his employees. Code brown is Walmart's designated code word for an active shooter, and employees are trained to help hide or evacuate vulnerable customers. Many fled through emergency exits to adjacent stores. Others concealed themselves in shipping containers or under tables. But for many, as the shooter entered a store containing hundreds of terrified customers, there was nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. At exactly 10:39 a.m., and having spotted an armed man walking through the store's glass entryway, an elderly gentleman tried running, but unfortunately, he simply was not fast enough to evade his killer's gaze. The shooter put a bullet in him, then turned his attention toward several people near the checkout area who appeared frozen with fear. He gunned each of them down, coldly and methodically, before doing the same to those sheltered in a branch of the First Convenience Bank. After walking his way through the store, killing as he went, the shooter reached the Walmart's eastern exit, then wandered out of the building at exactly 10:42 a.m., just 3 minutes after he first entered. Upon re-entering the store's parking lot, the shooter spotted a married couple running for cover behind their car. He opened fire on them, hitting both. Then bizarrely, he simply stopped shooting, with hundreds of people still running around. The lot in blind panic, the shooter returned to his vehicle. He calmly drove to the intersection of Sunmount and by Count, whereupon he spotted a Texas Ranger talking with an El Paso motorcycle officer, no doubt regarding the terrible events that had just unfolded. The two law enforcers watched in confusion as the shooter pulled over in the left turn lane, then climbed out of his car with his hands raised in the air. On his approach, he told them he'd just shot up the Walmart opposite Cielo Vista Mall. The officers then asked the man's name, and this is where the shooter becomes Patrick Wood Crusius. Crusius was born July 27, 1998. He was a child of divorce, with his parents having separated when he was just 3 years old, and by his teenage years he was living with his grandparents in the Dallas suburb of Allen. He attended Beverly Elementary School in Plano, where a former classmate, Daniel Heel, described him as a nice kid who played basketball and soccer during recess. But by the time Crusius graduated Plano Senior High School in 2017, his demeanor had shifted completely. One former high school classmate, Jacob Wilson, described Crusius as introverted, irritable, and strong-minded, often refusing to collaborate with others due to his temperament. Wilson noted that Crusius was frequently bullied for his speech, clothing, and aloof demeanor, which led to social isolation. Another acquaintance who walked to school with Crusius recalled him having an unsettling fascination with snakes. And following his arrest, Crusius waived his Miranda rights, confessing directly to detectives that not only was he the shooter, but he had deliberately targeted Latino Americans during the attack. He also confessed to the online purchase of a WASR-10 semi-automatic rifle and 1,000 rounds of hollow point ammunition online in June 2019. When asked why he'd committed such a hideous attack on unarmed people, Crusius directed detectives to the manifesto he'd posted just minutes before the first shot was fired, titled "The Inconvenient Truth." The post included Crusius' name, as well as information on the weapon he planned to use in his attack. He also claimed to be inspired by the Christchurch mosque shootings, which killed 51 people in New Zealand just a few months prior. Crusius expressed a passionate approval for the murders, as well as a disdain for environmental degradation, cultural and ethnic replacement, and what he referred to as a Hispanic invasion, while primarily focused on ethnic and racial grievances. The document also expresses fears of automation's effects on employment and blames corporations for overusing natural resources. In the immediate aftermath of the murders, media outlets described the attack as the single deadliest instance of anti-Latino violence in U.S. history. 20 innocent people perished at the scene. 3 more would pass away as a result of their injuries in the following months and years. 13 victims were taken to the University Medical Center of El Paso, and another 11 to the Del Sol Medical Center. 2 children, ages 2 and 9 years old, were transferred to El Paso Children's Hospital, where thankfully their conditions were stabilized. Later that day, President Donald Trump condemned the shooting as a hateful act of cowardice and promised to provide total support to the city of El Paso and its first responders. The president also announced that all U.S. flags, both foreign and domestic, will be flown at half-mast until sunset on August 8th. In a speech from the White House 2 days after the shooting, the president stated that, in one voice, our nation must condemn racism, bigotry, and white supremacy. These sinister ideologies must be defeated. Hate has no place in America. On February 6th of the year 2020, Patrick Crusius was charged with 22 counts of committing a hate crime resulting in death, and 22 counts of use of a firearm to commit murder. He quickly waived his federal bond hearing during his first federal court appearance and just a few months later entered a plea of not guilty to federal charges. It became clear that Crusius' attorney were attempting an insanity defense, as when the subjects of the death penalty arose, they began demonstrating Patrick's history of severe mental disabilities, His attorneys went on to state that Patrick was being treated with powerful antipsychotic medication, and that at the time of his arrest, he was in a, quote, state of psychosis. The evidence for Patrick's mental illness was so compelling that, in January of 2023, prosecutors announced that they would not be seeking the death penalty. But it seems this might also have been down to a sudden change of heart, because just a few weeks later, Patrick Crucius pleaded guilty to a grand total of 90 hate crimes and murder charges. Prior to his sentencing, the judge asked Patrick if he felt any remorse. After meekly nodding his head, he was sentenced to 90 consecutive life sentences, and in the state of Texas, if each life sentence is treated as a minimum of 40 years, 90 consecutive sentences would equate to exactly 3,600 years of incarceration. In the months that followed what Senator Ted Cruz called an unspeakable evil, there was an outpouring of tributes to the city and citizenry of El Paso. In one instance, Antonio Basco declared that the funeral of the 63-year-old wife Margie would be open to anyone who wished to attend. Then, on the day, hundreds of people from all over the United States arrived to pay their respects. While the funeral home was inundated with bouquets of flowers sent from every corner of the globe. 1 week after the shooting, a Mexican man named Jorge Chavez ran a total of 22 miles, one for each of the people killed in the shooting, starting at the Zaragoza Bridge in Juarez, Mexico, and finishing at the Walmart Memorial in El Paso, where the attack was perpetrated. In addition, the El Paso Healing Garden at Ascot Park was dedicated in August of 2021, which was later designated a national memorial in December of 2022. During such terrible and trying times, many seek comfort and reassurance in all kinds of music, art, film, and literature. But in this case, I believe it is William Carlos Williams' poem, The Second Coming, that says it best. The world is too much with us, and we are with it. The violence, the hatred, the turning, and turning in the widening gyre. But there is a second coming, not of despair, but of the small acts, the hands that reach, the voices that sing against the dark. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday and Thursday at 9 p.m. EST, and there are super fun live streams on Sundays and Wednesday nights. If you've got a story, be sure to submit them over at my email, letsreadsubmissions@gmail.com, and you might even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks for members of the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories and big compilations located anywhere you listen to podcasts. All links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, the brown